You know, Mez Nina continues to, I think it really does quite dramatically outsell Blue Lines, and though Blue Lines has been sort of recognised as our greatest achievement, inverted commas, that album still has been the most kind of commercially well received and the most popular, in that sense. And I guess I think 100th Windows sold about as many as Protection, but the record sales don't really add up to kind of the way people sort of perceive what the albums represent and what relevance they have. They're very different, aren't they? We were a bunch of guys in the sound system that put on parties that we kind of found ourselves in a recording studio, and I think Blue Lines was a sort of a sequence of accidents and events. And after we finished it, we went, wow, okay, so we've managed to encapsulate our past and our present and put all our personalities into it, and it has a unique feel to it. But maybe that's it, we should stop now, because that was the project and it's finished. And we didn't know what to do next, what we doing now? We've signed a record deal, etc. So we've never really we've never been that strategic. I think we've always wanted to move away from what we did last. We made it clear from the start, I think, with Blue Lines, that even though our references were kind of definitely based in hip-hop and had come through the whole reggae thing as well, and the whole way we made music through sampling, and that sort of the start from DJism into studio work, and the whole thing was obviously about what we were about, but we never felt a part of the dance scene because we always seemed to be making music at a tempo that was the opposite of what was being played on the dance floor at the time, and we never seemed to fit into that particular scene. And I think Bristol at that time, with Portishead and Tricky and Smith and Marty and Ronnie Size and everyone came from a particular period in Bristol, probably growing up at the same round time, end of the 70s, the end of the punk thing into the new wave, and then into sort of the reggae, dub, ska thing, and eventually hip-hop and electro. That whole period was really interesting.
Don't keep poking me, man, okay?
I can't stop poking you.
Poking me to make sure I'm still awake.
Yeah. I know, I've got that terrible feeling. I'm hearing the sound of my own voice echoing around this empty room. Going, oh my
there's
God,
still a great feeling about, the process of us making that track. The fact that we went to Abbey Road and 30-piece orchestra. In retrospect, looking at quite a lot of the tracks, the actual process of making them was a brilliant thing. The fact that we actually achieved all that and got to work with certain musicians and people, and making the videos and all that stuff. So looking back, it still brings a warm feeling. The fact that the interaction between us and other people has been good. It was good and still is.
I think the weird thing about Unfinished Sympathy is that it's like it was an exercise in deconstruction, as opposed to a tortured sort of experience in building this beautiful song or whatever, because it was a song that came with like verse, bridge, chorus, like these three sort of like classic sort of songwriting structures. And we ended up taking half that out, taking the chorus out, leaving a big space behind, and getting Will Malone to score the strings, and building this giant swell of music, because it suddenly had space in order to build a string arrangement where you wouldn't have that in a song normally. It'd be quite confined, which is what gave the song its kind of expanse, and it gave it the freedom to sort of like go through the movement, which really tugs at you. And in a sense that all the songs that we've mostly been sort of associated with being sort of classical great have normally been the simplest, most bizarre, unorthodox processes, where we've taken things apart and gone, oh, that sounds good. Whereas the songs you spend days and days and weeks and weeks and months over are normally the ones which you never ever come to terms with, Safe from Harm used a sample from Billy Cobham's album Spectrum. Working with a sample like that, you can't go wrong, It's just, it really has everything anyway, even as a loop with no vocals in it, with no other sounds in it. As soon as you loop that up and you listen to it, you're going, yeah, that does it, It just has a total groove, and, that encapsulates the way it was, what was about in those days, that kind of way of just grabbing 4 bars from someone else, stealing it, looping it, that kind of whole anarchic way of building a song on top of an extended beat or something, as a DJ would or whatever. And that was what it was about, that track in particular really does capture that spirit, I think. Rising Sun was a weird track because it was more developed than the other sort of ideas on Mezzanine. And we were talking about going on tour that summer, and we felt like we wanted to justify our presence in the world on stage. If we're going to do that, let's put something out there, do you know what I mean, at least make an effort. And that track had a kind of sensation of being something interesting that was going on, and it was developed a certain way. And yeah, it was a kind of a crossover from Protection to that. I guess looking back at it now, it didn't feel that way at the time, and also at the time we were caught up in the Melancholic, our record label. That was very much a big part of our lives, and we were being sort of exposed to a lot of really interesting music from around the way, and local bands and people we knew and friends. And it became quite a sort of, we were quite focused on that between Protection and Mezzanine. And you know, Rising Sun probably was this kind of, it had a kind of sort of bubble of buzz from that whole thing that was happening in Bristol, you know.
What we did with the Mezzanine was slightly up the ante and moved away from the dance sort of arena and started incorporating other elements that we were into before the sort of hip-hop-y dance thing came around, and hence the guitars came in. And I think that was probably, you know, better for us to move away from that sort of slow, dancey sort of stuff that we were doing before.
It's hard to say why Mezzanine still is the most popular album of ours. It might be it might simply be the musical dynamic, you know, the level of bass and guitar and energy we found on some of those tracks. I know that after recording and playing it live for 2 years, that we didn't want to go back and do it again, and we felt it very difficult to sort of like work between then and 100th Window, because every time we did make a noise, it felt like we'd done it before, and it became really annoying and boring because you weren't inspired to write songs. You had these instrumental pastures which were quite exciting, but there was no songs appearing, you know. Angel was another one of those classic mistakes. We went to the studio to record one song, we came up with another. Because Horace Andy didn't want to sing certain words from her. We had these lyrics written out for him, and he disagreed with certain words of a song, which I won't go into now because they weren't contentious. But he got really like, I'm not singing that. And we're like, oh, right, okay, let's start a new song then. And we pretty much did. We sort of changed direction entirely, and we started working with one of his old songs and putting it apart and stretching it across a completely different soundtrack. And out of that came this completely different piece of material. And at the end of the day, everyone was like scratching their heads going, is this good or bad? What are we doing? Because it wasn't what we set out to do in the start of the day, but it was definitely interesting. And it went from there, you know, and it became a bit of a theme with Mezzanine about pulling things out of shape, you know, and it kind of obviously ended up pulling the whole band out of shape, you know, because it highlighted the major differences in you know, ideology and music directions. You know, the places we wanted to go were all different, I think, you know. I think Mushroom was very much into hip-hop and soul, and that was really an important part of all our lives. Myself and Grant felt that we wanted to sort of diversify in order to sort of fertilise what was going on, you know.